Sometimes the smallest kindness is the one that rewrites your entire life. The rain didn't fall that night. It crashed hard against the pavement, against windows, against anyone still outside. And Emily Carter was one of the few who hadn't made it home. Her black work shoes soaked through, her thin coat clinging to her skin as she stepped out of the restaurant's back door, the neon sign flickering behind her like it was too tired to stay awake. She pulled her bag tighter against her side, counting in her head. $63.40. Not enough for rent. Not enough for heat. Not enough for anything except getting through one more night. She started walking, shoulders tight, eyes down. The city rushing past her in blurs of headlights and umbrellas that never slowed, never noticed, never cared. Until she saw her, just a few feet ahead, an older woman standing too still in the middle of the sidewalk. No umbrella, no coat thick enough for the storm, her silver hair already soaked, her hands trembling slightly as cars splashed water onto the curb. Beside her, people moved around her like she wasn't even there, like she was just another shadow in the rain. Emily slowed, just for a second, just enough to notice the way the woman's balance shifted, the slight misstep, the hesitation, and then she kept walking, because she had her own problems, because stopping meant being even colder, even later, even more behind on everything. But after 3 steps, she stopped, her breath catching in her throat, the sound of the rain louder now, heavier, almost pressing on her chest, and she turned back, quietly, like she didn't want the moment to notice her. She stepped toward the woman, and without saying anything at first, she lifted her own umbrella, angling it over the woman's head, shielding her from the relentless downpour. The woman looked up slowly, her eyes sharp despite everything, studying Emily in a way that felt deeper than a glance. "You'll get soaked," the woman said softly, her voice calm, controlled, almost out of place in the chaos around them. Emily gave a small shrug, barely a smile. "Already am," she replied, adjusting the umbrella so it covered the woman fully, leaving herself exposed to the cold rain that immediately soaked her hair, her shoulders, her skin. She didn't flinch, didn't complain. She just stayed there, steady, present, like it was the most natural thing in the world. A cab rushed past, then another, none stopping, none slowing, until finally one hesitated at the corner. Emily raised her hand, stepping forward into the street just enough to catch the driver's attention. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt as it pulled over. She opened the door and gently guided the woman inside, ignoring the way her own hands shook from the cold. "Go," she said simply, handing the driver the last of her cash without counting, without thinking twice. The woman didn't move right away. Instead, she reached out, her fingers light but deliberate as they touched Emily's wrist. "What's your name?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. Emily hesitated for just a moment, then answered, "Emily." The woman nodded once, slowly, as if committing it to memory. Then the door closed, the cab disappeared into the storm, and Emily stood there alone, soaked, shivering, her empty wallet in her hand, unaware that somewhere behind those rain-streaked windows, a pair of eyes was still watching her, carefully, quietly, like something had just shifted that couldn't be undone. The rain did not stop when the cab disappeared. It only grew louder, heavier, as if the night itself had something to prove, and Emily stood there for a moment longer than she should have, her hand still slightly raised from where she had closed the door, her fingers numb, her thoughts quiet. Then she exhaled slowly and turned away, her steps slower now, not from hesitation but from the cold settling deep into her bones, water dripping from her hair, sliding down her neck, soaking into the thin fabric of her shirt, each step squishing softly against the pavement as her shoes gave up trying to stay dry. The city lights blurred through the rain, stretching into long streaks of gold and white that made everything feel distant, unreal. She passed storefronts already dark, restaurants closing, people laughing, under umbrellas that cost more than everything she owned combined, and none of them noticed her. None of them saw the girl who had just given away her last dollars to a stranger, and that was fine. She was used to that. Invisibility had become a kind of shield, a quiet space where no one expected anything from her, and she did not have to explain anything in return. But tonight it felt different, not heavier, not lighter, just different, like something had shifted slightly out of place, something she could not name, She reached her apartment building 10 minutes later, the flickering hallway light greeting her with its usual tired glow, the smell of old carpet and damp walls wrapping around her as she pushed the door open, her fingers trembling as she dug for her keys. It took 2 tries before she got the lock to turn. Inside, the air was colder than outside, the silence thicker. She stepped in and paused, listening, as if expecting something, anything, but there was nothing. No hum of electricity, no faint buzz of the heater, just stillness. She reached for the switch and flipped it once, twice. Nothing. Her chest tightened slightly, but she did not panic. Not yet. She already knew what it meant. Overdue. Again, she let out a quiet breath. Setting her bag down on the small table by the door, water pooling beneath it, her clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin as she moved slowly through the dark space. The outlines of her life barely visible in the faint light from the street outside. A mattress, a chair, a small shelf with books she had not touched in months. She sat down carefully, her body finally catching up to the exhaustion she had been holding back all night, her hands resting loosely in her lap, still shaking, not from fear, just from the cold. She closed her eyes for a moment, just one moment, letting the sound of the rain fill the room. And in that silence, the memory replayed. The woman's eyes, sharp, steady, the way she had said her name like it mattered. Emily. She opened her eyes again, staring into the dark, a faint smile touching her lips. Not because anything had changed, not because her problems had disappeared, but because for a brief moment tonight, she had not been invisible, and that was enough. Or at least it felt like enough. She leaned back against the wall, pulling her knees slightly closer, the cold pressing in from every direction, and outside, somewhere beyond the rain and the empty streets, a black car moved slowly through the city, its headlights cutting through the storm, carrying someone who had not stopped thinking about the girl who stayed behind in the rain morning. Did not arrive gently. It crept in through the cracked blinds and thin lines of pale light, touching the edges of Emily's small apartment without warming it. She woke slowly, her body stiff from the cold, her clothes still damp, her fingers curled slightly as if they had forgotten how to move. For a moment she stayed still, listening. The rain had stopped, replaced by a quiet that felt almost too clean after the storm. She pushed herself up, exhaling softly as the room came back into focus. The same walls, the same silence, the same stillness that greeted her every morning. Nothing had changed, and yet something felt different. She could not explain it. Not yet. She stood carefully, her feet touching the cold floor, grounding her back into reality. Rent was still due, electricity still off, the world still moving forward without waiting for her. She reached for her bag, opening it slowly, as if expecting something new to appear inside. But it was the same, empty, except for a receipt. Folded in half. She did not remember putting it there. Her brows pulled together slightly as she unfolded it, the ink slightly smudged from the rain. But there it was, a name, handwritten at the bottom, Margaret Whitmore. Emily stared at it longer than she meant to. The name unfamiliar, yet the weight of it lingered in a way she could not ignore. She turned the receipt over. Nothing else, just that name. Simple, quiet, deliberate. She let out a small breath, placing it carefully back into her bag as if it mattered more than she understood. The city outside had already come alive. Distant car horns, footsteps, voices blending into a rhythm she knew too well. She moved toward the window, pushing the blinds slightly aside. The street below glistened from the rain, reflecting the morning light in soft gold streaks. People walked quickly, focused, purposeful, everyone going somewhere. Everyone needed somewhere to be. She watched them for a moment, then let the blind fall back into place. Today would not be different. She told herself that, quietly, firmly. She had a shift to get to, a manager who did not tolerate excuses, a life that did not pause for reflection. She changed into her spare uniform, still slightly wrinkled, smoothing it down with careful hands. Every motion precise, controlled, like it gave her a sense of order in a life that refused to offer any. Just as she reached for the door, there was a sound, soft at first, then clearer, a knock. Emily froze, her hand hovering inches from the handle. No one knocked on her door, not ever. She waited, listening. The knock came again, steady, intentional, not impatient, not hesitant, just certain. Her heart began to beat a little faster, not from fear, but from something unfamiliar, expectation. She stepped closer, slowly, her fingers brushing against the door before she turned the handle. The hallway light flickered as she pulled it open, and for a moment, she did not understand what she was seeing. A man stood there, tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that seemed out of place against the worn walls, his posture straight, his expression calm, but his presence carried a weight that filled the narrow space. Behind him, visible through the open stairwell, a sleek black car idled at the curb, its surface reflecting the morning light like glass. The man met her eyes, not with curiosity, not with judgment, but with quiet certainty, as if he had already found exactly who he was looking for. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice measured, respectful. "You are expected." Emily did not move, did not speak, her mind trying to catch up to the moment that had just stepped into her life without warning. The man stepped slightly aside, gesturing toward the car waiting below, and for the first time since the rain, Emily felt something shift completely out of place, like the world she knew had just tilted, silently. Permanently, Emily did not step back, but she did not step forward either. She simply stood there in the doorway, her hand still resting on the handle, her eyes fixed on the man as if waiting for the moment to explain itself. The hallway light flickered again, casting brief shadows across his face, but his expression did not change, calm, composed, certain, like this was not unusual for him, like people opened doors to him every day and followed without question. Emily was not one of those people. "Expected where?" she asked quietly, her voice steady despite the unfamiliar weight pressing against her chest. The man inclined his head slightly, respectful, measured. "Miss Margaret Whitmore is waiting for you," he said, and the name landed differently this time, not just ink on a damp receipt, but something real, something with shape and presence. Emily felt it settle in her mind, connecting pieces she had not realized were forming. The rain, the woman, the way she had looked at her. She exhaled slowly, her gaze shifting past him toward the street where the black car waited, polished, still, out of place in front of her worn building. Everything about this felt misplaced, like two different worlds had brushed against each other and refused to separate. "I have work," Emily said after a moment, not as an excuse, but as a fact, something grounded, something she understood. The man did not argue, did not rush. He simply reached into his jacket and held out a small envelope, clean, crisp, untouched by the chaos around them. "Your employer has been informed," he replied, and something in his tone suggested that the conversation had already happened, that decisions had already been made beyond her reach. Emily hesitated, then took the envelope, her fingers brushing against the smooth paper. It felt heavier than it should have. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the single page inside. A brief note, simple, direct, requesting her presence, signed with the same name she had seen that morning, Margaret Whitmore. Her grip tightened slightly, not from fear, but from the realization that this was no longer a coincidence. This was intentional. She looked up again, meeting the man's gaze, searching for something, any hint of explanation, but found none. Only patience, quiet and unwavering. She stepped back into the apartment for a second, glancing around the dim space, the cold walls, the silence, the life she had been trying to hold together piece by piece. Nothing here asked her to stay. Nothing here could explain what was waiting outside. She picked up her bag, slinging it over her shoulder, then paused, her eyes falling briefly on the folded receipt inside. The name still visible. She did not fully understand what this meant, but she understood enough to know this moment mattered. She returned to the doorway, closing it gently behind her as if sealing something in place. The hallway felt narrower now, quieter, her footsteps echoing softly as she followed the man down the stairs, each step deliberate, measured, like she was crossing a line she could not step back from. Outside, the air was crisp, washed clean by the storm, the city already moving forward as if nothing had happened. But for Emily, everything had shifted. The man opened the car door without a word, stepping aside, waiting, and for a brief second, Emily stood still, her reflection faintly visible in the dark glass. A girl in a simple uniform, standing in front of something she had never imagined for herself. She did not smile, did not hesitate any longer. She simply stepped in, and the door closed quietly behind her, separating her from the street, from the life she knew. As the car began to move, smooth and silent, carrying her toward a destination she had never chosen, but somehow had been chosen for her, the car moved without a sound, gliding through the city like it belonged to a different world, and Emily sat still in the back seat, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her damp sleeves brushing against the smooth leather as she tried not to shift too much. Everything inside felt too clean, too precise. Like even the air had been carefully chosen. She glanced out the window, watching the familiar streets pass by, but they did not feel familiar anymore. Not from here, not through tinted glass that softened every edge. The sidewalk she had walked just minutes ago now looked distant, smaller, like something she had already left behind. The man who had come to her door sat in the front seat, silent, focused, his posture unchanged, as if there was nothing unusual about this morning, as if picking up a waitress from a dim apartment and placing her into a car like this was simply part of his routine. Emily lowered her gaze slightly, her mind replaying the moment from the night before. The rain, the woman, the way she had held her wrist, the way she had said her name. It did not feel random anymore. It felt deliberate, like a door had been opened and she had stepped through it without realizing. The car turned smoothly onto a wider avenue, buildings rising taller, cleaner, glass reflecting the pale morning light in sharp angles. Everything here looked untouched by struggle, untouched by hesitation, and Emily felt it. The contrast, not as discomfort, but as clarity. This was a world that did not intersect with hers, not until now. She straightened slightly, her shoulders settling into a quiet composure. Whatever this was, she would meet it the same way she met everything else, without asking for more than what was given, without shrinking. After several minutes, the car slowed, then turned again, this time into a private drive lined with trees that still held drops of rain on their leaves. The building ahead came into view gradually, not towering, but expansive, its structure elegant, deliberate, like it did not need to prove anything to anyone. The car came to a stop, in front of wide steps, and for a brief moment, no one moved. Then the man stepped out, circling to open her door. Emily hesitated for just a second before stepping out, her shoes meeting dry stone this time. No puddles, no noise, just quiet, controlled space. She looked up at the building, her eyes tracing the clean lines, the large windows, the sense of order that seemed to exist in every detail. This way, the man said gently, gesturing toward the entrance. Emily nodded once, following. Without question, inside, the air shifted again, warmer, softer, the faint scent of something subtle, expensive, not overwhelming, just present. The floors beneath her feet were polished, reflecting light in a way that made each step feel more visible, more intentional. She became aware of her own movements, her posture, the way she carried herself, but she did not change it. She simply walked, steady, composed, as if she belonged there, even if she did not understand why. They moved through a hallway that felt more like a gallery, quiet, spacious, until they reached a set of double doors. The man stopped, turning slightly toward her. "She is inside," he said, and for the first time since she had stepped into the car, Emily felt a subtle shift in her chest, not fear, not doubt, just awareness. This was the moment everything had been leading to. The man opened the door slowly, stepping aside, and Emily took one step forward, her eyes lifting, and there she was, seated near the window, wrapped in soft light, dry, composed, unchanged. Margaret Whitmore turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting Emily's with the same sharp calm as the night before, as if no time had passed at all, as if she had been waiting not just for her arrival, but for this exact moment to begin. Emily did not speak. Right away, she simply stood there just inside the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the quiet brightness of the room, the soft light from the tall windows wrapping around everything with a kind of calm she was not used to. Margaret Whitmore sat perfectly still, her posture effortless, her presence filling the space without needing to move, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The silence was not awkward, not heavy, it was deliberate, like it was part of the conversation itself. Then, Margaret gestured gently to the chair across from her. A simple motion, unhurried. "Please," she said, her voice the same as before. Calm, steady, carrying a quiet authority that did not need to be raised. Emily stepped forward, each movement measured, aware of the space but not intimidated by it. She sat down slowly, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her back straight, her expression composed. She did not look around, did not fidget. She simply met Margaret's gaze, and something shifted in the older woman's eyes, something almost like recognition. "You did not hesitate long," Margaret said after a moment, studying her carefully. Emily tilted her head slightly, considering the words before answering. "Long enough to know I still wanted to help," she replied, her voice soft but clear. Margaret's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, more like an acknowledgement. "Most people would have kept walking," she said. "Most people did," Emily answered simply, and again the room fell. Quiet, but this time it felt different, not empty, but full, like something unseen had just been placed between them. Margaret leaned back slightly, her fingers resting lightly against the arm of the chair, her gaze never leaving Emily's face. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, not as a test, not as a demand, but as a question that carried weight nonetheless. Emily paused for a brief moment, then shook her head once. "No," she said honestly, and there was no embarrassment in it, no attempt to pretend otherwise. Margaret watched her for another second, then nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "That is good," she said quietly. "It means what you did was real." Emily did not respond, not because she did not have an answer, but because she understood that this moment was not about explaining herself. It was about being exactly who she had already been. Margaret reached toward the small table beside her and picked up a folder, placing it gently between them. The sound of it meeting the surface was soft, but it carried a finality that made Emily's eyes lower briefly toward it, then back up again. "Waiting. Last night," Margaret continued, "you gave away the last money you had." It was not a question. Emily did not deny it. She simply nodded once. "Why?" Margaret asked. And this time there was something different in her tone, not curiosity alone, but something deeper, something searching. Emily's answer came without delay, without performance. "Because she needed it more than I did," she said. And there it was, simple, direct, unpolished. Margaret held her gaze for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she opened the folder slowly, turning it toward Emily. Inside were documents, official, precise, the kind of papers that did not exist in Emily's world. Not until now. "I have spent many years," Margaret said, her voice softer. "Now, surrounded by people who calculate every action, every word, every favor." She paused, just briefly. "Last night, you did not calculate." Emily's eyes flickered down to the documents again, then back up, her heartbeat steady, her posture unchanged. "I do not know what this is," she said quietly, "but I did not help you for it." Margaret's expression shifted again, this time unmistakably. A faint, genuine smile touched her lips, not wide, not dramatic, but real. "I know," she said, and in that moment, the distance between them did not disappear, but it changed, becoming something else entirely, something neither of them had expected, but both of them understood mattered more than anything written on the pages between them. Emily did not reach for the folder right away. She let it rest there between them, untouched, as if opening it too quickly would change something she was not ready to change yet. Her eyes moved over the edges of the paper, the clean lines, the precision. Everything about it felt intentional, controlled, a sharp contrast to the life she had left behind just an hour ago. She lifted her gaze back to Margaret, her expression steady, searching not for answers but for understanding. "What happens if I say no?" she asked quietly, and the question did not carry defiance, only clarity. Margaret did not seem surprised. In fact, something in her posture softened slightly, as if this was the answer she had been waiting for. "Then nothing changes," she said calmly. "You walk out of here, and your life continues exactly as it was." Emily held her gaze, weighing the words, not their meaning, but their truth. There was no pressure in Margaret's voice, no persuasion, just a statement, simple and complete. Emily nodded faintly, absorbing it. Then her eyes dropped once more to the folder, This time her fingers moved, slowly, deliberately, lifting the cover. Just enough to see the first page. Her breath caught. Not dramatically, not visibly, just a subtle shift inside her chest. The numbers, the terms, the opportunity laid out in front of her was more than she had ever allowed herself to imagine. Education, stability, a future that did not depend on surviving week to week. She closed the folder gently, her hands resting on top of it now, not claiming it, not rejecting it, just holding the moment in place. You are offering this because of one night, she said, not questioning the generosity, but the reasoning behind it. Margaret shook her head slightly, her eyes steady. I am offering this because of who you were in that moment, she replied, and because I have spent a lifetime learning how rare that is. The room fell quiet again, but this silence carried weight, like something important was settling into place. Emily leaned back slightly, her shoulders relaxing just enough to breathe more freely. She looked around the room for the first time since she had entered, not in awe, not in comparison, but with a quiet awareness of the difference between this space and her own. Then she returned her attention to Margaret. If I accept, she said slowly, choosing each word with care, I do not want it to be because you feel sorry for me. Margaret's expression did not change, but there was a subtle shift in her eyes, something sharper now, more focused. I do not feel sorry for you, she said firmly. I respect you. The words landed differently, heavier, more precise. Emily held them for a moment, letting them settle. Respect was not something she heard often, not in her world, not directed at her. She nodded once, slowly. Then her fingers slid the folder slightly closer, not all the way, just enough to show movement, to show consideration. And what do you expect in return? She asked, her voice still calm, still grounded. Margaret's answer came without hesitation. Nothing you are not already capable of giving, she said. Your honesty, your effort, your ability to remain exactly who you were last night, even when everything around you changes. Emily exhaled softly, her gaze lowering for just a second before lifting again, clearer now, steadier. The storm had passed, but something else had begun, something quieter, something deeper, and as she sat there, with the folder beneath her hands and the weight of possibility in front of her, Emily realized that this was not about being saved, it was about being seen, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to consider what might happen if she chose to step forward instead of simply enduring what came next. Emily did not answer immediately, not because she was unsure, but because she understood that this moment deserved more than a quick decision. Her fingers resting lightly on the folder as if feeling the weight of everything it represented, she looked down once more, then slowly opened it again, this time turning the pages with careful attention, each line precise, each detail structured. It was not just an offer, it was a path, clearly laid out, education fully funded, housing arranged, mentorship under people whose names she did not recognize but whose titles carried undeniable weight. It was a life that did not depend on luck. Not anymore. She closed the folder again, more gently this time, her breathing steady, her thoughts no longer scattered. When she looked up, her expression had changed, not dramatically, but enough to be noticed. There was clarity now, not just awareness. Margaret observed her without interrupting, her gaze patient, allowing the silence to do its work. Emily straightened slightly in her chair, her shoulders settling into a quiet decision. If I accept, she began, her voice calm, measured, then I do it my way. Margaret's brow lifted just slightly, not in resistance, but in interest. Explain, she said softly. Emily nodded once, her eyes steady. I do not want special treatment, she continued. I do not want doors open just because you asked for them to be. I will take the opportunity, but I will earn everything that comes after. The words were not defensive, they were defined, clear boundaries drawn with quiet confidence. Margaret held her gaze, and for a moment the room felt smaller, more focused, like everything unnecessary had fallen away. Then slowly, Margaret nodded, once, deliberate. Good, she said, because that is the only way this works. Emily felt something shift again, not outside, but within herself, a subtle alignment between what was being offered and what she was willing to become. She did not smile, but there was a softness in her eyes now, something that had not been there before. Margaret reached forward, closing the folder completely and sliding it toward Emily, this time without hesitation. "Then we begin," she said, her tone quiet but final. Emily placed her hand over the folder, not gripping it, just resting there, acknowledging it, accepting not just the paper, but everything attached to it. "When?" she asked. Margaret's answer came without pause. "Now," she said. And the word did not rush the moment. It anchored it, made it real. Emily exhaled softly, a breath she did not realize she had been holding, and nodded, just once. The decision made without ceremony, without hesitation. Margaret stood then, her movement smooth, composed, and for the first time since Emily had entered the room, the dynamic shifted again, not in hierarchy, but in motion. This was no longer a conversation. It was a beginning. "There are things you will need," Margaret said as she moved toward the door. "Clothes, documents, introductions." She paused briefly, glancing back. "But those are details." Emily rose as well, her posture mirroring the calm around her, not overwhelmed, not uncertain, just present, ready as anyone could be for something they had never planned. They walked together toward the door, the space behind them quiet, unchanged, but everything ahead different. As the door opened, the light from the hallway spilling in, Emily took a step forward, not as someone leaving her old life behind, but as someone choosing what came next. And for the first time, the path in front of her did not feel like something she had to survive. It felt like something she could shape. The hallway felt different on the way out, not because it had changed, but because Emily had. Each step she took now carried a quiet certainty that had not been there before, the polished floor reflecting her movement in faint, steady lines. Margaret walked beside her without speaking, her presence calm, unhurried, as if there was no need to explain what would come next because it was already unfolding exactly as it should. They reached another set of doors, larger this time, and as they opened, the space beyond revealed itself in layers. People moved with purpose, voices low, conversations precise, everything operating with a rhythm that felt both controlled and alive. Emily paused for a fraction of a second, not out of hesitation, but to take it in, the structure, the energy. The difference, Margaret noticed, but did not comment. Instead, she continued forward, and Emily followed, her pace matching without effort. They passed individuals who acknowledged Margaret with subtle nods, quiet respect that did not need to be announced, and yet no one stopped them, no one interrupted. It was as if the path ahead had already been cleared, as if her presence here had been anticipated long before she arrived. They entered a smaller room, this one more functional, less expansive. A long table, several chairs, a screen mounted on the wall, and a woman standing near the far end, composed, professional, her posture straight as she turned to face them. "Miss Whitmore," she said, her tone respectful. Then her eyes shifted to Emily, assessing, not unkindly, but thoroughly. "This is Emily Carter," Margaret said simply. And that was enough. No explanation, no justification. Just a name placed into a space that immediately adjusted to include it. The woman nodded once, extending a hand toward Emily. "I am Laura Bennett," she said, her voice steady. "I will be coordinating your transition." Emily shook her hand, her grip firm but not forceful, her gaze direct. "Nice to meet you," she replied, her voice even. She did not look away, did not shrink under the scrutiny. Laura seemed to register that, a slight shift in her expression, almost imperceptible, but present. "We have prepared a preliminary schedule," Laura continued, gesturing toward the table where a set of documents had already been arranged. Orientation, placement assessments, and initial housing arrangements. Emily glanced briefly at the papers, then back at Laura, absorbing the information without letting it overwhelm her. Margaret stepped back slightly, not removing herself from the moment, but allowing it to unfold without her direct involvement. This was no longer about offering. It was about action, about movement, about what Emily would do next. Laura continued outlining the structure, the expectations, the timeline, each word clear, precise, building a framework that Emily could step into, not as someone lost, but as someone capable, as someone expected to meet it. And Emily listened, not passively, but with intent, her mind tracking each detail, not questioning the scale of it, but understanding the responsibility within it. When Laura finished, there was a brief pause, the room settling into a quiet stillness. Emily nodded once, a simple acknowledgement, not agreement to everything, but readiness to begin. Margaret watched her from across the room, her expression composed, but her eyes sharper now, observant, measuring not what Emily said, but how she held herself. And in that moment, it became clear that this was not about changing Emily into something new. It was about placing her into a world that would test whether she could remain exactly who she had already proven herself to be. As the meeting moved forward, Emily felt the last remnants of the life she had known begin to loosen, not erased, not forgotten, but no longer defining the boundaries of what came next. And as she stood there, listening, absorbing, stepping into something she had never planned, she realized that the storm had not been the turning point. It had only been the beginning. The meeting did not end with a dramatic shift. It unfolded quietly, like everything else in this place, structured, intentional, as if every second had already been accounted for before Emily stepped into the room. Laura gathered the documents with precise movements, aligning each page as she spoke, outlining the next steps with calm efficiency. Your temporary housing has been arranged 5 blocks from here, she said. You will have access to everything you need starting today. Emily listened without interruption, her attention steady, her posture unchanged. She did not ask how much it cost. She did not ask who approved it. She only focused on what mattered, what she would need to do. Margaret remained near the window, silent now, watching not the process, but Emily herself, the way she absorbed information, the way she did not rush to react, the way she held her ground in a room designed to overwhelm. And there was something in that stillness that confirmed more than any words could. Laura finished speaking and paused, giving space for questions. The room settled into a brief silence. Emily glanced down at the schedule in front of her, then back up. When do I start the assessments? She asked, her voice calm, direct. Laura's expression shifted slightly, not surprised, but acknowledging the focus of the question. Tomorrow morning, she replied, 8 o'clock sharp. Emily nodded once, committing it to memory without hesitation. I will be there, she said, and there was no doubt in her tone, no uncertainty, just a statement, simple and firm. Laura gave a small nod in return, then turned slightly toward Margaret, as if waiting for any final direction. Margaret stepped forward just enough to be part of the space again, her presence recentering the room without effort. That will be all for now, she said, her voice quiet but decisive. Laura gathered the remaining documents and exited without delay, leaving the room in a stillness that felt different now, more focused, more personal. Emily remained standing, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, the schedule still in front of her. Margaret studied her for a moment longer, then spoke. You did not ask how much this costs. Emily met her gaze, her expression steady. Because it is not mine to measure, she replied. And again, that faint shift appeared in Margaret's eyes, something close to approval, but deeper than that, understanding. Most people would, Margaret said. Emily tilted her head slightly, considering. Most people expect something in return, she answered. You already told me what you expect. Margaret held her gaze, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. And you believe you can meet it, she said, not as a challenge, but as a reflection. Emily did not hesitate. I know I can try, she replied, and the honesty in her voice was not diminished by the lack of certainty. If anything, it strengthened it. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was not about questions or decisions. It was about recognition. Margaret stepped back slightly, her posture easing, just enough to signal the shift. Then we will see where that leads, she said softly. Emily nodded once, then reached for the schedule, folding it carefully before placing it into her bag. The motion small, but deliberate, marking the moment as real, as something she was taking with her, not leaving behind. As she turned toward the door, there was no hesitation in her step, no glance back at what she had just entered, only forward, toward what was already beginning to take shape. And as she walked out of the room, into the quiet hallway beyond, the difference was no longer just in the space around her. It was in the way she moved through it, not as someone invited in by chance, but but as someone who had chosen to stay, the hallway did not feel as unfamiliar anymore. Not because Emily had memorized its turns or its structure, but because something in her had settled. Each step she took now carried intention, not reaction. She walked beside Laura, who had returned to guide her through the next phase, her voice calm, efficient, outlining details that would have overwhelmed her just a day ago. But now Emily listened differently, not trying to catch up, but keeping pace. They moved through another corridor, then into a smaller office where a set of neatly arranged items waited on a desk: clothing, documents, a phone, everything placed with precision. "These are for you," Laura said, gesturing lightly. "Temporary, until your full arrangements are finalized." Emily stepped closer, her eyes scanning the items, not with excitement, not with disbelief, but with quiet acknowledgement. She reached out and picked up the phone first, turning it slightly in her hand, feeling its weight, its newness. Then she set it back down exactly where it had been. "Thank you," she said, her voice even. Laura observed her carefully, noting the absence of hesitation, the lack of overreaction. "There is a car waiting to take you to your apartment," she continued. "You will have the afternoon to settle in, and tomorrow everything begins." Emily nodded once, absorbing it. Then she gathered the items, folding the clothes neatly over her arm, placing the documents into her bag, every movement controlled, deliberate, as if she was already aligning herself with the structure around her. They left the office together, the transition seamless, no wasted motion, no unnecessary pause. Outside, the city had fully awakened, sunlight reflecting off glass and steel, the storm from the night before reduced to nothing more than damp pavement and fading clouds. The car waited again, just as before, but this time Emily did not hesitate. She stepped in without looking back, the door closing softly behind her. The ride was shorter this time, quieter, the streets shifting from business to residential, from towering buildings to spaces that felt more contained, more personal. The car slowed, then stopped in front of a building that stood clean and understated, modern but not excessive, the kind of place that did not need to announce itself. Emily stepped out, her eyes taking in the entrance, the clean lines, the sense of quiet order. She followed Laura inside, through a lobby that felt calm, intentional, a reflection of everything she had experienced since that morning. They reached an elevator, the ride up smooth, silent, each floor passing without announcement. When the doors opened, Laura led her down a short hallway and stopped at a door. "This is yours," she said, handing Emily a key card. Emily took it, her fingers closing around it with a sense of grounding. She opened the door slowly, stepping inside. The space was simple, but complete. Light filled the room from large windows, the furniture arranged with care, everything in its place, not extravagant, but enough, more than enough. Emily walked in, setting her things down carefully, her gaze moving across the room, not searching for flaws, not comparing, just understanding. This was real. This was now. Laura remained by the door, giving her space. "I will return tomorrow morning," she said. "Be ready." Emily turned back toward her, nodding once. "I will be," she replied, and there was no hesitation in her voice. Laura gave a final nod, then stepped out, the door closing quietly behind her, leaving Emily alone in the space. She stood still for a moment, the silence different here, not empty, but steady. She moved toward the window, looking out at the city below, the same city she had walked through in the rain, the same streets, the same movement. But from here it looked different, not distant, not unreachable, just open. She rested her hand lightly against the glass, her reflection faintly visible, and for the first time, she saw it clearly. Not the waitress, not the girl trying to get through the next day, but someone standing at the beginning of something she had not planned, but had chosen. And as she stood there, the weight of it did not overwhelm her. It steadied her, because deep down, nothing about who she was had changed. Only where she was about to take it the night did not rush her. It settled slowly, like everything else had begun to do since that morning. Emily moved through the apartment with quiet steps, not exploring in excitement, but understanding each space, each detail. The kitchen, clean and untouched, the bedroom, simple and ready, the small desk near the window where tomorrow would begin. She set her bag down carefully, placing the folded schedule on the surface, smoothing it once with her hand as if grounding it into place. Then she stepped back, her eyes lingering on it for just a moment longer. 8 o'clock, she repeated it silently, not as a reminder, but as a commitment. She moved to the closet, hanging the new clothes neatly, her movements the same as they had always been, precise, respectful of what she had. No matter how much or how little, nothing about that had changed, and it would not. She paused then, her hand resting lightly against the doorframe, her thoughts drifting, not forward, but back, to the rain, to the cold, to the moment where none of this existed yet, where the only choice had been whether to stop or keep walking. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling the sound of the storm, the weight of the umbrella in her hand, the way the woman had looked at her, not as someone small, not as someone invisible, but as someone worth remembering. Emily opened her eyes again, the reflection in the glass across the room catching her attention. She stepped closer, not to study her appearance, but to see something deeper, the same face, the same eyes. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had shifted, not around her, but within her understanding of what was possible. She reached up slightly, brushing a strand of hair back into place, a simple gesture, familiar, grounding. She did not smile, but there was a quiet steadiness in her expression, something that had not been there before, the kind of calm that did not come from comfort, but from clarity. She turned away from the reflection and moved back toward the window, the city outside now glowing with evening lights, each building alive in its own way, each window holding a story she would never know. She rested her hand lightly against the glass again, the cool surface grounding her, reminding her that this was real, that this was not something that would disappear when morning came. She thought about Margaret, about the way she had spoken, the way she had watched, not with expectation, but with recognition, and she understood now. This was not a gift in the way most people would see it. It was an opening, a chance, and what came from it would depend entirely on what she chose to do next. She stepped back from the window, her gaze returning once more to the schedule on the desk. Tomorrow was not just a continuation, it was a test, not of her ability to become someone else, but of her ability to remain exactly who she had always been in a world that would try to change that. She walked to the light switch and paused, her hand resting just above it, taking in the room one last time, not with attachment, but with awareness. This was the first space she had entered not by necessity, but by choice, and that mattered. She turned off the light, the room settling into quiet darkness, but not emptiness, and as she lay down, the silence did not feel cold. It felt steady, like something had finally aligned, and somewhere across the city, in a space just as quiet but far more powerful, Margaret Whitmore sat alone, looking out at the same skyline, her thoughts not on the deals waiting for her tomorrow, but on a girl who had stood in the rain and made a decision without calculation, a decision that could not be taught, could not be bought, and she knew, with a certainty that had taken her years to recognize, that the real test was not whether Emily would succeed in this new world, but whether this new world would be ready for someone like her. The morning arrived without hesitation, clear and steady, sunlight stretching across the floor as if it had always belonged there, and Emily was already awake before the alarm, sitting at the edge of the bed, her hands resting loosely together, her breathing calm. She had not slept deeply, but she had rested, and that was enough. She stood, moving through the space with quiet purpose, every motion simple, deliberate. She dressed in the clothes prepared for her, adjusting them without vanity, only precision, as if she understood that how she carried herself mattered more than what she wore. The schedule lay where she had left it, unchanged, waiting. She picked it up, glancing once at the time, then set it back down. She did not need to read it again. She had already committed it to memory. 8 o'clock. She stepped toward the door, pausing briefly, not to hesitate, but to acknowledge the moment. Then she opened it and walked out. The hallway was quiet, the building still, the elevator ride smooth and silent, and when she stepped outside, the city met her differently this time, not as something she had to move through, but as something she was stepping into. The car was already there, waiting, just as before, but this time it did not feel unfamiliar. It felt expected. She entered without pause, her posture steady, her gaze forward. The drive was short, efficient, and when she arrived, The building stood as it had yesterday, unchanged, but she was not the same person walking toward it. Inside, the movement had already begun, people in motion, conversations unfolding, the rhythm of a place that did not wait. Emily stepped into it without breaking stride. Laura was there, already waiting, her expression composed but attentive. "You are on time," she said, and it was not a compliment. It was a confirmation. Emily nodded once. "I said I would be," she replied, her voice calm, grounded. Laura gestured toward the hallway, and they walked together, not as guide and stranger anymore, but as two people aligned in purpose. The room they entered was different from the day before. More people, more presence, individuals seated, reviewing documents, exchanging brief words. The atmosphere focused, precise. Emily took her place without instruction, sitting where indicated, her back straight, her hands still, her attention forward. The assessments began, questions asked, scenarios presented, each one designed not just to measure knowledge, but to reveal something deeper: how she thought, how she responded, how she held herself under pressure. Emily did not rush. She did not try to impress. She answered as she always had, directly, honestly, without embellishment. There were moments of silence after her responses, not empty, but evaluative, and she did not fill them. She let them stand, as they were meant to. Time passed without announcement, the session unfolding in a steady rhythm, and when it ended, there was no applause, no declaration, just quiet acknowledgement. Laura approached, her expression unchanged but her eyes more focused now. "You will continue tomorrow," she said. Emily nodded, rising from her seat with the same composure she had carried from the beginning. As she stepped back into the hallway, the noise of the room fading behind her, she did not look back. She did not need to, because something had already been made clear, not by words, but by the way she had moved through it, the way she had remained unchanged in a space designed to reshape people. And across the building, behind closed doors, Margaret Whitmore stood by the window once more, watching the city below, her reflection faint in the glass, her thoughts quiet but certain. The world had not changed Emily. It had simply revealed her, and in that quiet realization, something else settled into place, not as a conclusion, but as a beginning, because the real shift was not that Emily had entered a new world. It was that this world had just been introduced to someone it could not easily define, and would never again overlook.